Greetings viewers, EricTheCarGuy here, back again with, well, not necessarily a repair video for you today. Today, I'm going to try and redeem myself. It was a few years back where I did a video about how to solder wires together, and let's just say some of you didn't necessarily feel that I did a good job with that video. I will concede that I could have done a better job, and that's kind of what I'm here to do today. I have a bunch of tools here to show you, and also just different techniques that I've picked up in my research and through the things that I've learned over the past few years. So I'm going to try to give you as close to the definitive soldering wires video as I possibly can here. Okay, before we get started, let's talk a little bit about the tools that I have here for you today. One of the main things, and this is the soldering gun that I used in the original video, and the tip wasn't as bad back then, but as you can see, that tip is pretty bad these days. And that's for a couple of reasons. Probably because I didn't keep it tinned enough, and probably because I didn't keep it clean enough. Either way, it pretty much renders this gun ineffective. So if your gun is not working as it should, then you're not going to have as good solder joints as you could have. So I retired that one, and I brought in this Radio Shack model that I had from home. These you can find just about anywhere, but this, once again, the tips started getting old, and I recently bought a 2-pack of these and just replaced them. And it seems to work a lot better. However, I do have an issue with this type of gun, and that issue is it's only getting hot while you hold the trigger. So if you're soldering one wire at a time and you've got several to solder, maybe you're repairing a wiring harness, something like that, every time you set this down it's going to start to cool, and you kind of have to start over again. So I have gotten away from this type of soldering iron, and actually in the reading or the research that I did for this video, I found that these type of soldering irons, the Weller that I have here, that's just stationary, it's always plugged in, always on, seem to be what everybody that does this a lot uses. And this actually comes with a soldering station. I have a wet sponge here, which is something you should have. You can use a kitchen sponge, you can get it wet, but I wouldn't use it on your dishes after the fact. This will help you keep the tip clean. Remember I talked about with this gun, how I had a problem with not keeping this tip clean, and as a result the tip degraded over time, and away we go. But this Weller also has the ability to set the temperature that you're using, and I found the hottest temperature setting actually gives me the quickest work for what it is that I'm doing. So that actually comes into play also. From that original video, I have my homemade wire holder, if you will. This is just a piece of wiring that you find for your house. They usually have a black, a white, and a green. You can just take one of those wires, it's stiff, I wrapped it around a socket to loop it around, and soldered on 2 alligator clips onto the end of it to hold wires. They also make a tool that does this exact same thing, but I did this and it works great and has for years. So I have more than one of these laying around. Lastly, if you are out someplace away from an electrical socket and you need to just join wires together, I also have a butane soldering iron here that I will also demonstrate. It does the same thing as the Weller does, it's just no cord. This is it. This is all I need. You will need to fill these things up with butane. This is the type of butane I'm using for that one. And it also comes with its nice little damp sponge here to help keep the tip clean as we work. You're also going to need to cut wires, and here I have some side cutters / crimper. This is actually a crimping tool is what this is also for, which we'll get to a little bit later in the video. And wire strippers. Now you can use a pair of side cutters and strip wires away, but I don't recommend it, because whenever you do that, many times what you end up doing is taking a little bit of the wire with you, so you've got less wire to work with. So it's better to have a good wire stripping tool. And I say good wire stripping tool because there are tools out there similar to this one, which is a combination crimper / stripper. There are tools out there like this one that might not necessarily be so good, and the way to determine if it's good or not is if you can take the handles and move them back and forth like this a great deal, it's going to be a lot more difficult to strip those wires. I've had other tools of this type, and that was the main problem, is they didn't seem to grab onto the wire enough so that I could strip it well. This guy here is the Mac Daddy as far as wire strippers go of this type. You've got the different size wires that you can put in here, but If you want quick and easy, this automatic stripper is probably the way to go. There's another style of this. It's sort of like it looks like a scissor that you can lay the wire into, but you're going to need to be able to strip the wire in some way. You can, like I said, use the channel locks or the side cutters to do that with. It's not recommended. You're better off with a tool like this, and I'm mainly going to be using this tool today. Now let's talk about one thing that during the course of trying to shoot this video, I came to the realization that the solder that you use is just as important as the tools that you're using. Initially I thought it was an issue with my tools, but I'm going to say that I had some difficulty using this type of solder. And I wish I could tell you what it was, but I can tell you the difference. This solder here, this Radio Shack solder, is better. It's got this 60-40. I'm not really sure. They're both rosin core, they're both the same diameter, but for some reason this solder I was having a lot of difficulty with whenever I tried to use it. I wouldn't be able to tin my tip properly. It didn't flow as well. But the minute I started switching over to this solder, it worked a heck of a lot better. So look for 60-40. I'm not saying you have to buy the Radio Shack brand, but I'm saying the 60-40 because I also have this light duty solder here, and this is from Archer. And this worked just as good. Once again, had the 60-40 on the side of it. So as you're looking for solder, the thing to look for, I would say, is the 60-40. Lastly, I have some Flux or soldering paste. And this is something that you can probably find in your hardware store where you do in plumbing supplies, probably where you'd find this. This is a trick that I've employed recently that actually works really well as far as soldering wires together. So I'm going to pull this one out also. First, we've got the wire that's cut, but then we need to strip a little bit of the wire away. And in order to do that, I'm going to use this tool here, which does that. And you want to strip away about 1/4 inch of the insulation. And with this, that's all I have to do is just squeeze the trigger and away it goes. Same over here. Another 1/4 inch. And now we've got some exposed wire. If the wire you have inside here is all kind of corroded, which does happen sometimes, try to cut it farther back and try again, because that corroded wire is not doing you any favors. The reason why we're soldering wires together is because we want the best connection possible. And for this one, this technique, I'm going to show you just sliding the two wires together like this, and then squeezing, and then giving the whole thing a twist. Take your hands and twist them in opposite directions. And that should give you something that looks roughly like that. And I probably should have said before I even got started, it's not too late yet. But if you're doing this for real and you're on the vehicle or whatever, you want to put your shrink tube on beforehand. In fact, why don't we just do that now? We'll just put that on there for you. And we'll just go through the whole process at least this one time. And with the shrink tube, think of like 2/3 larger than what you have as far as the joint. So go a 1/3 on either side of the joint. And then when you put the shrink tube on, I might have a little too much here. When you put the shrink tube on, try to move it as far away from where you're soldering as possible. The heat from soldering can actually cause your shrink tube to activate, and if that happens, you won't be able to move it down the wire, so you want to make sure that that's kind of far away. I don't know if this initial connection is going to, yeah, it's not going to work. So I'm going to change up on this one and show the X method, I call this. Lay the two wires together like this, and then twist them together over the top of one another like so. And then that way they're all twisted and brought together like that. Now I'm going to take my wire holder. This also works as something of a heat sink as you're doing this work, which is helpful. I'm going to set it like that. First I'll take the soldering iron, and before I put it on the wire, what I'm going to do is what's called tinning the tip. And what that means is I'm just going to take a little bit of solder and just put it on the end there. It should be sticking to it a little bit better, but put it on the end of the tip. This helps protect the tip from oxidation. It also helps with heat transfer into the wire. Now we will begin to solder. I'm going to take the soldering iron and put it under the wire, and I'm going to take the solder and push it in from the top. I'm not going to try to drip the solder onto the wire. What I'm wanting to do here is I want the heat from the wire to draw the solder in. That's what makes the best solder joint, is when the heat actually pulls the solder into the joint. So you don't want to drip it on there, you want it to be pulled in. And the best way to do that is just to take the tip of the soldering iron, put it under the wire, and I'm just going to try and push on it a little bit with the solder itself. So I'm trying to push these two things together, and when the soldering iron gets hot enough, the solder will begin to melt and draw into the joint. And someday the solder will melt and be drawn into the joint. There we go. You can see the wire's hot enough, it's pulling it in. And that's it, you're done. And you wipe the tip of the soldering iron on the sponge, put it away so it stays clean. But that is a good solder joint. Let me give you a close-up on that. The reason why this is a good solder joint is because you can still see the strands of wire there. And you can see all the way around that the solder was brought into the joint. So that is a nice, clean solder connection, as opposed to a connection that has like a bunch of blobs of solder on the outside. Let me show you one of those. You can see on these other joints of how it's all balled up, and in some cases it wasn't drawn all the way through the solder joint itself. Those are not good solder joints. If you look at that as compared to what I have here, you can see the difference between the two. You can see what's good and what's not so good. So if you're seeing something like this, maybe one of a couple of things. It may be that your soldering gun isn't hot enough and not making the right temperature, or it could be the solder itself that's causing an issue, or it's that you're trying to drip the solder into the joint as opposed to letting the joint draw the solder in. That's the main takeaway here. You want to make sure that the solder is drawn into the wires, and then as it does that, that's going to be your best chance of a connection. Stuff like this, well, it's just the opposite. Stuff like this is not nearly as good. All right, now that we've got our joint, we can slide the shrink tube over, put it in the center. I'm going to take a lighter and do this with, just apply a little bit of heat. You can see the tubing shrinking right around the joint. And there you have a nice electrical connection from soldering wires together. Let's try the butane one this time. So this is the butane soldering iron, and for whatever reason, mine doesn't light if this tip is on the end of it, so I have to actually light it now, and then so I have to start it, and then I have to very carefully slide this over the end. It's kind of precarious, I know, but very precarious today for some reason. But this works in exactly the same way. It's a metal tip that's hot. And once again, I'm going to cut my wire, strip about 1/4 inch off of each end. These also have some wire cutters down in here, by the way. I don't know if you saw those. All right, so now for this particular joint, what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide them together like this. And then I'm going to twist both wires, as I showed earlier. There we go. Those are pretty well together. I'm not going to use shrink tube this time, but as shown earlier, how to use it, that's how you use it. And this one works the same way, in that you want to Make sure your tip is clean, but also you want to tin the tip first. Then also put it underneath the wire, and then make the joint draw the solder in. It may take a minute for the wire to heat up. This joint isn't as good as the last one. It'll do, but actually I kind of feel like I want to go back in here and add more to that area down there. This takes practice, and as you can see, I spent a little time before doing this video to try the different tools to see what would work, and I practiced. The more you practice at this, the better you'll get. And if you know what a good connection is and you know what you're looking for, eventually you'll get to a point where you're proficient. Why don't we try one other method that I'm going to call the Ed China method, and then we'll try one last little tip and trick that might help you with these solder joints. All right, now I call this the Ed China method because he's the one that I've seen do this. Ed China is from the show Wheeler Dealers. He's the mechanic there, personal hero. But anyway, what he does when he solders wires together is he does them one at a time. And when I say one at a time, what he does is he solders the end of the wire itself, tins the tip, but he will add solder to each wire end first. He's got one end. Now with this method, as you can see, both wires are pre-soldered. So now that they're soldered like that, I'm going to hold the two of them together or position them in such a way to where they're together like this. So now the wires are held in close proximity. They're not soldered together yet. Tinning the tip, I can't stress that enough. Before, after, this helps those tips last longer so they don't end up like mine in the beginning of the video. So now I'll just hold the soldering iron underneath both wires. And what I'm looking for here, it's a little bit more difficult for me. It's not, I didn't quite get these lined up correctly. I don't often employ this technique, but I wanted to show it to you because it is another way of doing this. And if Ed China's doing it, it's good. See, it went a little quicker when we finally went to join the wires together. As I said, it's not my preferred method, but it does work pretty good. And it does create a nice, solid joint when you're done. Now, lastly, I'm going to show you one little trick that could help the solder flow better and actually speed up this process a little. And that is using a little bit of the Flux. And like I said, you can find this in a plumbing supply place. But you use it to sweat pipes together, sweat copper pipes. So it's still a form of soldering, you're just doing it with copper pipes as opposed to a couple of wires. Twist the two wires together, like so. And then I'll just take a little bit of the soldering paste. put it on the joint. Like a little booger. Okay, and watch the magic happen here with using just a little bit of flux when you go to solder wires. Done. And if you look at this joint, it's like a perfect joint. A little bit of flux made that go that much faster. It transfers the heat a lot faster, it draws the solder in between all the wires. You've got yourself a nice, solid solder joint. Well, let's wrap this up. I hope I've redeemed myself in this video a bit from the last one. I took a lot of your clues and your suggestions that many of you made in the comments of that video. I also did a little bit of research on my own and also spent some time doing a little more practice with the tools that I have, and I got some new tools to show you and also some different methods. The takeaway is use good tools, use good solder. This 60-40 stuff, that's the solder that I would use, and that's actually the stuff that I found that worked the best for me. Good wire strippers, these are also key, also important. I'll have links in the description to all the tools that I used here today if you want to check those out for yourself. The main takeaway here is practice, practice, practice. The more familiar you are with the tools, the more familiar you are with joining wires together in this way, the better you'll get. So look for a nice clean joint. You want to still be able to see the wires or the outline of the wires. That way you know that it's all soaked in there. And your little trick or little ace in the hole would be to use a little bit of flux on there. That will really help things, really help it draw some of the solder into the joint if you're using that flux. Anyway, if you have automotive questions, I would ask that you head over to EricTheCarGuy.com. There's a welcome video there to let you know about the plethora of options we have available to help you with those automotive issues, should you have them. If you wish to connect with me socially, I can be found on Google+, Facebook, and Twitter. And I close each of my videos with be safe, have fun, and stay dirty. I'll see you next time.